Good afternoon. My name is Alan Nachumson of Nachumson PC. Nachumson PC is a law firm headquartered in Center City, Philadelphia. We handle real estate and business matters for clients who are real estate developers, investors, small businesses, restaurants, and just various business owners. And today I have Dan Ritterman from Tactics. Welcome, Dan.
Alan, thanks so much for having me. I appreciate it.
Yeah, so I figured we would have someone like Dan, who's a commercial broker in town who represents tenants with regards to office leases to talk about what's going on pre-COVID, COVID, and potentially, hopefully, post-COVID. So Dan, why don't you just tell us a little bit about yourself and your company, and then we can get going in terms of questions.
Sure. Alan, thanks so much for having me. I really appreciate it. Tactics Real Estate Advisors is a tenant representation brokerage. We're located at 2 Logan Square here in Center City, Philadelphia. It's one of my first days back in the office. I'm very excited to be back here. What we are is we're a pretty specialized commercial real estate brokerage. We exclusively represent tenants or occupants of office space. We do some industrial work, some retail work too, but most of our work is focused on the office world. A lot of law firms, professional services, things like that, corporate headquarters, work like that. And our sort of focus is, I'm a fully recovered attorney. I still keep my license active, but a lot of us are sort of recovered attorneys. And our feeling is that you get the best representation in a process like real estate when you have an exclusive advocate who's working for you in your corner. So we've created a brokerage to align ourselves with end users of real estate to make sure that they have someone who's their exclusive advocate as they walk through the process. So most commercial real estate brokers make a lot of their money representing landlords, and they will bring tenants into their buildings also. But we don't think that that's the way that you get your best representation. You wouldn't want to hire a lawyer who's also representing the person who's on the other side of a lawsuit or a transaction. In fact, you wouldn't be able to in most cases. So we think a similar idea should be enforced in the commercial real estate world, and we can step into our clients' shoes when they don't really have a full-time real estate person to run this process and sort of act as a consultant on their behalf to help them get the best possible outcome from their real estate search.
Yeah, well, as now you see more and more people are working from home. Like you stated, this is one of your first days back in the office. I mean, we have been sporadically in the office, and now we're more and more in the office. What's going on in the office world nowadays?
It's been an interesting 4 months, to say the least. We've been very busy. A lot of times, what we've been doing a lot of recently are these rent relief requests. A lot of companies are out there. Almost everyone in Philadelphia is currently paying for office space they're not able to use. And a lot of companies are trying to figure out, what are my options for paying rent? Can I defer rent? Can I get out of paying rent while I'm not using it? Will you look at my lease and take a look at it? I think times like this, the whole conflict of interest that is inherent in the commercial real estate world becomes too hard to miss or too difficult to ignore in a situation like this, where if you're approaching your landlord to ask for rent relief and you realize that the broker that you used to help you do the transaction in the first place is also representing that same landlord, that's when you start thinking, maybe I should try to find a broker who doesn't have these loyalties to these landlords that can really represent my interests as I try to walk through this difficult process. So our value proposition for what we do has sort of never been more relevant, which has caused us to be very busy over the last few months, fortunately.
So what are the options you're seeing from a tenant perspective, of the options that are available in terms of rent relief?
So what I've been telling a lot of tenants is there's really 2 ways that you can resolve this situation. You can do it within the confines of your lease, and you can do it outside the confines of your lease. Now, it's really important that you read your own lease, consult your own attorney about what the language of your lease says, because every lease is different, right? A commercial lease is a document that is drafted by lawyers, it's heavily negotiated, and you need to look to the terms of your own lease to really make sure. Now, what we are finding is that most leases likely do not provide a tenant with a right to get out of paying their rent obligation. You'll know this as someone who does a lot of real estate law. In Pennsylvania, at least, especially, generally speaking, the covenant to pay rent is separate from most of the other covenants within a lease. And it's unlikely, again, you need to have an attorney review it, but it's unlikely that your lease is going to provide you a clear theory for relief. So what we are instructing our clients to do, and we've put out a few publications about this, which I'm more than happy to share if anyone wants to read through them, is you need to be honest about your situation with your landlord and go explain to them why COVID has created a temporary problem for you and your business, but why you will come out of the COVID pandemic stronger than you were when you went into it, so that it will entice your landlord to want to work with you to keep you within their portfolio long term, right? Landlords are being inundated with these requests for rent relief, and we need to make sure that you are standing out and creating a case for yourself about why you're a good candidate for rent relief. And what we're generally seeing is not straight rent relief, but some kind of abatement where they're shifting the current rent liability towards the later months of the lease or adding months on the end of the lease. So before you approach your landlord to ask them for some kind of relief, you should really be prepared to offer them something too in exchange for that relief, whether it's extra rent at the end of the term or moving it to the end of this year and paying these months off over time. But we want to make sure that we're going in with a clear plan, because there are simply too many of these requests going in for landlords to agree to everything that comes across their desk right now.
Yeah. Well, in addition to the pre-existing relationships, you have a lease of a certain term. I'm sure you're dealing with some tenants who are looking to move on from their landlord or decide to stay on with their landlord. So typically, what's the time frame that you're going to need to start looking if you want to put those options in front of yourself?
So generally speaking, in the pre-COVID world, when we would talk to a tenant, we would say, we generally want to be engaged about 2 years before your current lease ends. That gives us enough time to engage an architect, find out what you really want your new office space to look like, use that plan to go out into the market and identify spaces that may work for you. And then you have to remember, we have a whole lease negotiation that has to happen, including negotiating an LOI, and then construction, permits, and all those other things that kind of come along with that. So 2 years out, generally speaking, is when we like to have enough time to sort of develop all of our options for you as they may come across the table. Even if you're planning on staying in your current office, we hear this all the time. Dan, I understand the process, I get it, but I really just want to renew my current deal with my current landlord. The best way to create leverage with your current landlord is to create some legitimate move options so that your landlord sort of doesn't understand if you really want to stay or if you're actually planning on leaving. And then we can sort of create that, create those incentives and sort of create a fear amongst the landlord you legitimately might leave. We always tell our clients, you won't know what your landlord's best option is or best offer is until you back up the moving truck to your office, right? Now, we don't want to actually call a moving truck in most cases, but we want to create that feeling that the moving truck is on its way and you better give us your bottom line or we're going to really be out of here. So even if you want to stay in your current space, we really still think it's worth going through the process, because that's when you'll get your best value from your current landlord.
All right. So obviously the concepts don't change pre-COVID or post-COVID, but like, what are some of the things that you would look at in general if you are looking to renew or relocate? And then how's that changed during COVID?
So the number one driver of real estate cost for a company is always going to be square footage. It's always going to be, how much space do you take? Generally speaking, in Philadelphia, rent is quoted on a per square foot per year basis, and you're paying for every square foot that you take. So you can get the best broker out there who can find the best negotiating leverage you can find, and maybe you'll get a 10 to 20% reduction in the face rate of the building when it's all said and done, let's say. But if you can find a way to take half of the square footage, whether it's by getting more efficient through hoteling, which we'll talk about, or going to remote work, or just simply moving people to other offices or different functions, if you get your square footage down 50%, you're going to take 50% off of the cost of your rent. So if you're really looking to get more efficient in your real estate spend, the best way to do that is to get more efficient in how you're using space. And then we'll do what we do to sort of get you the best deal and best economics on that square footage, but really through the getting efficient process, which we walk our clients through about how do we really want to use our office space in the future. That's the best way to cut down on your real estate spend if that's your primary goal.
Okay, so if I have an option, right, as like my law firm has an option to renew within the next year, what would you recommend to me in terms of like exercising it, negotiating it? Like what would I be looking at?
Sure. So generally speaking, your renewal clause will provide you with your worst case scenario, right? If I can't beat this in another building, or I can't get my current landlord to make me an offer that makes sense somewhere below my renewal rate, that is something that I can fall back on. Anecdotally, what we see, companies very, very rarely actually exercise their renewal rate. A lot of times the renewal rate is not set in stone. It will say something like 95% of market rate or 100% of market rate, and it will define the market. And as you can imagine as an attorney, when you have sort of ambiguities like that, well, what does 95% of market rate mean? Well, now you have a whole discussion about what that even means in the first place, right? And a lot of these renewal rates will even have arbitration clauses built into them in the event that, shockingly, landlords and tenants will have different definitions of what that means, right? So those renewal clauses, while they're important and they serve a purpose as a baseline for negotiating, what we generally find is at the end of the day, it is less costly and more efficient for both sides to simply come to an agreement about what that should look like. Obviously, in some cases that falls apart and you do actually have to fall back on that arbitration clause, which is why it's important to have these well drafted by a good real estate attorney such as yourself. But to make sure that you really are doing a good job of thinking about these contingencies in the event that you do sort of have to pull the plug on negotiations and rely on that renewal clause. But what I will say is that, generally speaking, your best outcome will come from testing the market, gaining a bunch of options, and then using them as leverage against each other to drive the rates down for your business. That's been harder to do recently when the market's been so hot, but that has all sort of changed over the last 3 or 4 months.
So what are you seeing these last 3 or 4 months in terms of what can I actually get, which I couldn't have gone pre-COVID?
Sure, it's a great question. The past 5 years, up until, let's say, February of this year, we saw one of the hottest landlord markets we've ever seen in Philadelphia. Rental rates have been sky high, vacancies have been very, very low, and landlords have really had their pick of tenants that they wanted, because if you didn't want the terms that were offered in front of you, there was another tenant waiting in the wings who needed that office space. So there were a lot of sort of very exciting things going on. That is all changed now, right? 4 months later, if you're a tenant in the market, you are being courted by every building out there who really wants to bring you in to try to fill space that they currently have. So the entire sort of leverage structure has changed recently over the past 4 months, where landlords have been, sky high rents, low vacancies, towards rents are still sky high, but vacancy, it's not so clear. There are a lot of companies that may not make it out of this, or they may get more efficient and downsize space, try to sublease space out. We've just started seeing more subleases come onto the market as companies give up their space or try to downsize. So there are more options now for tenants out there to try to lower their real estate spend. Now, what we're seeing on the negotiating front is landlords really want to hold on to their, what we're called the sticker price of their building. So let's say you were a $30 building before COVID started. You really want to be a $30 a square foot building when COVID is over. So you really want to maintain that price. But what you have to realize as a tenant is that that sticker price, or that marketed rate per square foot, is only one component of what you actually pay in rent at the end of the day. When you go into a building, there is usually a free rent period, which might be for as much as 10% of the term in some cases. And there's usually a very large build out allowance that is given to the tenant to help them build out the space, so they don't have to come up with all that cash up front. So what we are seeing, at least anecdotally so far, is landlords are really trying to hold on to that sticker price so they can stay, I'm still a $30 building, but you have a lot more wiggle room than you had before in the amount of money that a landlord is willing to help build out the space with, and also in the free rent period. So we can get you more months of free rent where you're not coming out of pocket. So although the sticker price may not have changed, your out-of-pocket expenses for building out your space, moving into the space, and then occupying the space in the first year or so have come way down. So we think that's really where the wiggle room is, and will be for the next year or so until things sort of shake out more.
Yeah, and we were talking about beforehand how you've had one situation where the landlord actually reimbursed or made payments during the course of the lease term to the tenant as long as they stayed in the premises so long, right?
Yeah, I've used the term, we're kind of in make-a-wish territory with some of our tenants, where landlords may not agree to things, but there are no offers that are sort of being dismissed outright like they were 3 or 4 months ago. Because like I said, pre-COVID, there was another tenant waiting in the wings to take that space if you didn't end up taking it. That is not the case anymore. So all offers are being entertained, and we're getting creative. Like you said, in some cases, we're getting cash payments made to our tenants from landlords in certain cases in exchange for giving them the sticker price that they're hoping for, so they can continue marketing their building as that X dollar building.
So that's a show me the money provision?
That's exactly right. It's a show me. Yeah, we just patented that recently.
Exactly. Well, it's like if you go in the residential world, which we do a lot of too, it's like you have a seller's assist where the seller gives the buyer money back. It's really a landlord's assistant for all intents and purposes. You want to show a certain price, right? So you're talking about the $30 a square foot. So in the entire world, you can market it as a building as $30 a square foot. But in reality, what you're doing is you're subsidizing that $30 a square foot by giving away either tenant improvements, free rent, or cash payments actually to the tenant, as long as they stay on the premises for certain periods of time.
That's right. And if you have a broker who either represents that landlord and whose real job it is to get that landlord top value, or maybe is not as creative as us wonderful folks at Tactics, who isn't thinking about these other ways that they can bring your total rent expense down while giving the landlord what they want, you may be leaving money on the table without realizing it by just giving into what the landlord's asking for without knowing there are these other creative ways that we can bring your real estate spend down significantly in some cases.
So you were mentioning about like there's a lot of subleasing. Is that like considered like almost like a ghost market that's being created, or like some type of parallel market where you're seeing opportunities where may not be public?
So generally subleases are all listed on CoStar right along all the other spaces. So it's not that there's a ghost market for it, but what it does create is pressure to bring rates down, because when there are a lot of subleases on the market, generally speaking, they're being marketed at below market value for that building, for whatever that market value may be. If you think about it, a lot of these buildings are owned by these REITs, they're owned by these big investment companies where there is no one person whose pocket is being really hurt if there's a vacant space in a building, right? There's a company, they build this vacancy into their modeling, they understand it's going to happen. Subleases are kind of the opposite of that, where when there's a sublease on the market, like for instance, if you decided that you didn't want your office space anymore, wanted to go remote, well, you'd be subleasing your space, but before you found someone to sublet it, you'd be paying your own rent, right? So there's a different incentive structure with subleases where there is a company out there paying rent on this space who would like to no longer be paying rent on it. And they may have incentives to take a lower number to start recouping those costs faster. So we generally will see a little bit more wiggle room in the sublease market. You'll have opportunity to get furnished space. You'll have opportunity to get something you can move right into. The other side of that is you're largely going to be taking those spaces as is. So if they don't work for your operation, you'll be coming out of pocket most likely to make those alterations because you don't have a landlord who's willing to give you a tenant improvement allowance at the start of a sublease, generally speaking. There's always exceptions to these things depending on who you're subleasing from, how large it is, how long the term is, and all these good things. But generally speaking, you're going to be taking a sublease as is. You'll probably be able to get it slightly below market rate with a little bit more wiggle room, and it may be furnished, but it has to work for you immediately as is.
Gotcha. So we talked about pre-existing tenants who how they're dealing with their current landlord if they don't have an option to renew or relocate. But then what about the new tenants, right? Like people who are actually relocating. You mentioned. So I guess the first thing is with COVID-19 and the diminished capacity of construction, there's probably people behind schedule, right, to be able to move into their spaces.
There are. We recently published a piece in the Philadelphia Business Journal. I think that was called the House of Cards, that was about to hit sort of the commercial real estate market. Now, what I will say is that our anticipation about how bad that was going to be, I think it turned out to not be quite as bad as we thought it was. So construction was shut down for about 3 months. A lot of the healthcare stuff kept moving. But one of our main concerns was, if you think about it, if you're planning on moving your office, you do the construction in your new office before your current lease ends, so that when your current lease ends, you can move right into the new office, right? So if your construction on your new office is delayed, well, you can't move out of your current office to move into your new office. But that means that your landlord, who was relying on you vacating your current office so they could do the construction for the next tenant coming in, is also delayed on doing that work, and so on down the line, which is how you kind of create this like house of cards effect. What we're currently seeing is that we think construction is delayed about 2 months. That's rough. Some projects may be longer, some projects may be shorter, but a lot of these tenant improvement projects that we had sort of in the works have been pushed back about 2 months, which isn't quite as bad as we were anticipating. But if you are a new tenant coming into a space, you do need to start thinking about and writing into your lease when you're expecting the space to be delivered to you, the condition it's going to be delivered to you in, and what your landlord's willing to provide you if they cannot deliver the space that they were planning to deliver you in time to get it. Because you may be in an office and you may be subject to holdover charges. So you really want to be cognizant of, can my landlord deliver the space on time? And if they cannot deliver the space on time, what are they planning on doing for me? So knowing whether your office you're moving into is currently occupied, what that tenant's plans are all things that you want to take into account to make sure that you're not going to have any of these problems when it comes time for you to vacate your space or move into your new one.
Yeah, the holdover provisions you typically see are anywhere from 110% to 200%. So that means if you hold over your stay in your current premises, you're paying a decent amount of money to your current landlord. So, I mean, what I would think is you write that in, it's going to be a monetary payment that the new landlord has to pay to cover that, assuming even the current tenant, landlord will let you stay, or alternative space. I've seen situations where, God forbid, we can't get into this fit out space. Give me some alternative space at a reduced cost or something to that effect. And you know what? Now people are doing more remote like access. We talked about it. People are doing more remote access, and I guess that kind of goes over to like, if you're not like under a new lease, right? Like you were talking about the term hoteling, right? So this is something to think about when I'm looking for new space. Like, how can you save me money, and what are the concepts during COVID and beyond that a tenant should be thinking about?
Yeah, absolutely. I put out a video on LinkedIn pretty recently about trends in the commercial office space that I think will change either right now and also into the future. And hoteling is one of these big ones. So if you think about the way a hotel works, it's a single room that multiple people use on different days, right? So think about how that would apply to an office space is the days of everybody having a dedicated office may be over, where there may be 5 offices for every 10 people who need them. And on the days that you need an office, you'll sign up, 24 to 48 hours in advance to reserve that office for that day. Maybe there's a day off for cleaning in between use, depending on what the protocols are for that. But these are all ways that we can reduce the real estate footprint that you need to take, which again, as I said earlier, is the easiest way to reduce your real estate spend. So if you can create some of these spaces where multiple people can use them on different days, you can schedule them. People are coming to the office on certain days and they have to meet with clients, meet with coworkers. And on days when they do this heads down work, they do that work remotely and they don't come into the office. So we can make some of these rooms multi-purpose, through the use of hoteling. And that way we can cut way down on how many people are in the office, and then how much space we need to take, which again is the largest driver of your real estate cost.
Yeah, I would think that there's some restrictions, like for instance, my industry, law firms, right? I definitely need my own, whether I'm sharing the office with someone over multiple days or not, I need like a closed door to be able to close my door because I have some confidentiality, requirements, ethical requirements such as that, to make sure that people don't know what my clients and I are talking about. So it really depends on the industry. Someone who's more sales, well, they probably need a place where they can think, right, and talk.
Right. Right, absolutely. And we do a lot of law firm work. We do a lot of the law firms in the city are clients of ours. And what we're seeing from them is that they are I sort of at the outset of this thought that was an industry that could probably go remote with a lot of it. And what we're really finding is they are people who've really been hurt by not being in the office, especially the younger attorneys who are really relying on sort of shadowing the older attorneys to sort of learn how they go about their trade. And also, a lot of lawyers, they spend their time doing really heads down work that requires intense concentration. And especially these days where all of our kids are at home, this isn't true ideal work from home conditions where it's hard to do that heads down work uninterrupted that you kind of need to process a document and sort of digest it in order to understand what these intricate clauses that are, by the way, in a lot of cases are not written to be easily understood, what they truly mean. So we're finding that especially law firms are really eager to get back to their offices as fast as they can.
Yeah, I know for myself, we have a small firm, so I was actually the only one working here. Like it started once a week, just to pick up client checks and deposit them. And then it went to twice a week, 3 times a week. Then I started going full time just because I was the only one here. I'm social distancing. It's quiet. It's actually the best time I've ever had because, no one's interrupting me and it's great. When you work at home, I have a new puppy. He wants to play with me all the time and, just all these distractions. So it really does, for my industry, I think you're still going to see more and more people who are going to require working from the office for many.
That's what we've seen too. That's exactly what we've seen. If you think about if the average lawyer has to bill 8 hours a day, you probably have to work 10 to bill 8. And that's in ideal conditions. And no one at home is working in ideal conditions. So you end up in this situation where you're sort of perpetually working. And that's just not healthy, I think, from a mental standpoint.
That's right. All right. So, we're hoping to get a vaccine by the end of the year, maybe a year from now. You represent a lot of tenants. What are they seeing in terms of they're coming back to work and, in terms of pre-vaccine requirements?
Sure. So I am splitting up the future into 2 eras. There's the pre-vaccine era and the post-vaccine era. And if you are somebody who currently operates an office, there's a very good chance that over the last 3 months, you've gotten a solicitation from a furniture company or an interior design company who thinks that you need to totally redesign the way that you operate your workspace and throw out all your current furniture and replace it all with COVID compliant and safe items. And you can do that, But I think we all need to sort of remember that we are going to, assuming things go as I think we all think that they will, we are all going to spend more time in the future in the post-COVID era than we will in the sort of the post-vaccine era than we will in the pre-vaccine era, right? So what we are counseling our clients to do is you need to take reasonable steps to ensure the safety of your employees and clients who are coming into your office in the pre-vaccine era without sort of overcorrecting, realizing that we are going to be essentially in this post-vaccine era. So what we're suggesting are things like hoteling, so fewer people are in your offices, spread your workstations out, do a lot of extra sanitizing, make sure people are wearing masks, and following all the guidelines and making sure we're all social distancing and doing those things that really, like, work from home when you can, come into the office when you can and when you have to. Or if you're in a situation like we have a very large office here, we don't have very many people who work here, so it's very easy for us to come in the office and be separate. But take reasonable steps over the next 18 to 24 months to ensure everyone is being safe and work is getting done without making massive investments in your infrastructure that may not be relevant 2 years from now. So think about what your office of the future looks like. And if there are steps that you can take now that also go towards that goal while keeping your people safe, that's fantastic and we should take them. But let's not overcorrect for the next 18 months, keeping in mind there's still going to be this whole post-vaccine era that's hopefully going to last for many, many decades, where we will be back in our office, and we don't want to be stuck with sort of our pre-vaccine fixes that hinder our business in the future.
Cool. Well, this was very informative. Now, if anyone wanted to reach out to you and like learn a little bit more about yourself or how you can be of assistance to them as a tenant, how can they reach you?
Sure. So my email address is dritterman@tactix.com. Last name is Ritterman, Ritterman. Tactix is TACTIX.com. Please also look me up on LinkedIn, Daniel Ritterman. I'm doing a lot of publishing papers, publishing videos, talking with other industry professionals, talk about how they're sort of dealing with what's going on and thinking about their real estate use. So we can get a lot of different perspectives out there. But those are the best ways to reach me. I'd be happy to talk to you anytime. I do also want to say that unlike my former life when I was an attorney, we do not bill by the 6 minutes. Mm-hmm. So I'm more than happy, my time is free. I'm more than happy to lend advice. So please feel free to reach out to me and we can connect and see if there's a way we can help each other.
All right, great. And again, my name is Alan Nachumson of Nachumson PC. You can reach me at alan.nachumson@nachumson.com. NOCHUMSON is how you spell Nachumson. You can also reach us at 215-399-1346. Dan, I really appreciate the time. It was great. And hopefully we'll get out of this COVID world pretty soon.
I hope so, Alan. Thanks so much for your time. I appreciate it.
All right, thank you. All right, bye.